Imagine if one day someone said that the entire universe revolves around Earth. Sounds absurd, right? But for centuries, this was one of the most respected ideas in science. And we're not talking about popular superstition. Philosophers, astronomers, and even great thinkers believed in it wholeheartedly. What's curious is that looking back, it seems impossible that anyone took this theory seriously. But then comes the question, what if centuries from now people laugh at our scientific truths of today? This video will take you on a journey through some of the most bizarre scientific theories that were nearly accepted as absolute truth. Theories that, in their time, seemed brilliant, even logical. Some were born from legitimate observations, others from pure imagination. And they all have something in common. They show how human curiosity can both illuminate and mislead. Get ready to discover ideas involving the sea catching fire, people with rays in their eyes, and even universes made of cheese. Yes, you read that right. And the best part is that each of these theories tells us not only about science, but about the human spirit. The drive to explain the unexplainable, even if it's with hypotheses that now seem hilarious. So hold on tight, because this journey will prove that the line between genius and madness is sometimes razor thin. Now let's start with the first of these ideas that came close to becoming scientific law. Imagine looking at a starry night sky and genuinely believing that all those stars revolve in perfect circles around Earth. Well, that was the foundation of geocentrism, one of the most influential theories of antiquity. The Greek philosopher Claudius Ptolemy, back in the 2nd century, organized this idea with mathematical precision. For him, Earth was the fixed center of the universe, unmoving while the sun, moon, planets, and stars orbited around it in complex but predictable paths. And believe it or not, this made perfect sense at the time. After all, when you look at the horizon, doesn't it seem like the sun rises, moves, and sets? For over 1,000 years, this view dominated schools, churches, and universities. Questioning geocentrism was practically an act of rebellion. But what sounds like medieval nonsense today was once considered serious science, backed by calculations and highly respected treatises. And the most curious detail, even when some observations didn't align with the theory, astronomers found ways to fix the numbers. They created extra orbits called epicycles to make everything fit. It's like trying to fix a buggy piece of software by adding more and more patches instead of rewriting the code. It was only centuries later with Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler that heliocentrism, the idea that Earth revolves around the sun, began to gain traction. But until then, geocentrism was almost an unquestionable truth. And that's not even the strangest theory on the list. The next one will show you how at one point in history people believed the air was filled with an invisible substance that made fire possible. Now picture this. You light a candle, see the flame glow, and think. This is happening because there's an invisible substance inside the object, being released into the air. That was the basis of the phlogiston theory, an idea that dominated science for nearly 200 years. Developed in the 17th century, the theory claimed that all combustible materials contained phlogiston, a kind of fire fluid. When something burned, this substance was released into the atmosphere. Simple, elegant, and completely wrong. The most curious thing is that this explanation seemed to solve many questions of the time. For example, why does coal burn and turn to ash? Because it released its phlogiston. Why does iron rust? Because it lost part of this mysterious essence. The problem was that as experiments became more sophisticated, the theory started tying scientists' minds in knots. In some cases, metals that burned gained weight instead of losing it, which made no sense if they were losing phlogiston. But just like with geocentrism, scholars found ways to explain the unexplainable. It was only with the work of Antoine Lavoisier in the 18th century that the phlogiston theory was debunked. He showed that combustion was actually the result of a reaction with oxygen. In other words, there was no magical fluid, just a concrete chemical interaction. Imagine the disappointment of those who swore the air was full of this mystical substance. It's like finding out the Wi-Fi of fire never existed. And the next theory is even more bizarre. Have you ever thought about someone believing that microscopic beings appear out of nowhere from absolute zero like magic? Picture leaving a piece of raw meat on the table and Days later, seeing maggots wriggling on it. What would be the immediate conclusion back then? The critters were born from nothing. They sprouted from the meat itself. That's how the theory of spontaneous generation came to be. For centuries, many believed that life could emerge without parents, without reproduction, without anything. Decomposing matter would simply give birth to new beings. To them, worms, insects, and even small fish appeared like magic. The idea was so appealing that even great thinkers like Aristotle defended versions of this theory. After all, it seemed obvious. If you left wheat in a dark corner, rats would soon appear. Who would think of invisible microorganisms, bacteria, or microscopic eggs? This belief persisted through the Middle Ages and only began to crumble in the 17th century when scientists like Francesco Redi started experimenting. He placed meat in jars, some open and others sealed with gauze. The result? No maggots in the sealed jars. The explanation lay in fly eggs, not magic. But even then, the theory of spontaneous generation held on. It wasn't until Louis Pasteur in the 19th century that it was definitively disproven. Through careful experiments, he showed that microorganisms always come from other microorganisms. Now think about it. For over 2,000 years, this idea was taught and repeated as fact. It's like if today someone said that cell phones self-generate when you leave loose parts in a drawer. And the next theory will surprise you even more. Can you imagine if someone said we have an invisible fluid in our bodies, responsible for all our diseases and cures? Now hold on to this. There was a time when people believed that all our emotions, diseases, and even cures were tied to a mysterious invisible fluid flowing through the body. This concept became famous thanks to Franz Mesmer, an 18th century Austrian doctor. Mesmer argued that there was a kind of animal magnetism, a vital energy connecting all living beings. If this energy was balanced, a person was healthy. But if something disrupted it, bam, diseases appeared. And how did he treat his patients? Using magnets, hypnotic gestures, and even group sessions where everyone gathered around a tub of magnetized water. Reports from the time describe people going into trances, crying, laughing, and even healing after these practices. It was like watching a mystical ritual with a scientific veneer. The most impressive part is that Mesmer won over crowds. Nobles, artists, and even respected doctors attended his sessions. For many, it seemed like a revolutionary medical breakthrough. After all, who wouldn't want to believe that a simple hand movement could restore health? Of course, over time, tests showed that the vital fluid didn't exist. But curiously, Mesmer's techniques paved the way for the development of modern hypnosis and even influenced studies in psychology. It's curious to think, a theory that started as pseudoscience ended up leaving real legacies. It's like a buggy app inspiring the creation of genuinely useful technology in the future. But hold on, because the next theory is even weirder. What if I told you there was an idea that diseases were caused by bad smells, the so-called miasmas? Imagine walking through a city in the 19th century. Streets without sanitation, rivers full of garbage, strong odors everywhere. Now think, if you got sick, the most accepted explanation would be that you were breathing poisoned air. That was the basis of the miasma theory. According to this idea, diseases were caused by miasmas, toxic vapors or exhalations that came from dirty, smelly places. For doctors at the time, a bad smell was practically synonymous with mortal danger. It's not hard to understand the reasoning. After all, epidemics like cholera, plague, and typhus always appeared in filthy, foul-smelling areas. So it seemed logical to associate the odor with the cause of the disease. The problem was that this diverted scientists from the real culprit, microorganisms. For a long time, entire governments based health policies on this theory. They built ventilation systems, burned aromatic herbs, and even tried to purify the air with smoke. In London, for example, they believed the famous cholera epidemic of 1854 was caused by the stench of the sewers. It was only when John Snow, a visionary doctor, investigated the cases and discovered the link between contaminated water and the disease that the miasma theory began to crumble. He proved it wasn't the smell, but a bacterium in the water that was killing so many people. Curious, right? It's like if someone today said a weak Wi-Fi signal causes the flu. It makes sense at first glance. until science reveals another truth. And if you thought blaming smells was strange, wait until you hear the next theory. Have you ever imagined that our planet could be hollow inside? Picture someone claiming, with complete confidence, that our planet is hollow inside. Sounds like science fiction, but this was a theory taken seriously by some scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries. One of its main proponents was Edmund Halley, the same astronomer who gave his name to the famous Halley's Comet. He believed that Earth wasn't a solid sphere but was made up of several concentric layers, like onion shells, with vast habitable spaces inside. The idea gained traction when, later, other authors began to imagine that these underground cavities could house entire civilizations, illuminated by an inner sun. Some even suggested that Earth's poles were secret entrances to this subterranean world. This theory wasn't confined to scientific circles. It inspired writers like Jules Verne, who in Journey to the Center of the Earth popularized the imagery of endless caverns and creatures hidden beneath our feet. For many people at the time, this didn't seem like delirium, but a plausible hypothesis. Of course, as geological studies advanced, the hollow Earth idea was debunked. Today we know, thanks to seismic measurements, that the planet's interior consists of a mantle and core, not empty spaces. But even so, the theory hasn't entirely disappeared. To this day, some groups believe in a secret world beneath the Earth's crust. Isn't it incredible how even brilliant minds can be swayed by unlikely ideas? And if you thought the hollow Earth was strange, wait until you hear about the next one. A theory claiming that the moon was made of cheese. Now tell me, who hasn't heard the expression, "the moon is made of cheese"? Well, believe it or not, this idea wasn't just a children's joke. For centuries, there was a belief, sometimes taken seriously, sometimes as satire, that our natural satellite could literally be a giant cheese. The reasoning was simple. When we look at the moon's surface, full of craters and patches, it resembles a holy cheese. In times when telescopes were limited and astronomical knowledge was still in its infancy, this comparison gained traction. But the most curious thing is that this theory wasn't limited to peasants or folklore. It appeared in literary works, philosophical discussions, and even texts by supposed scholars. For some, the cheese moon was just a fun metaphor. For others, it was a real possibility. And think about it. Before space exploration, who could prove otherwise? The sky was there, untouchable, like a mysterious canvas. There were no rockets, no satellites, no astronauts to bring back samples. Imagination filled the void. The myth persisted through generations and became part of cultural folklore. Even today, in cartoons and jokes, the moon appears as a giant yellow cheese. It's a perfect example of how an apparently absurd idea can take on a life of its own and remain in the popular imagination. Now, if you think that's naive, wait until you hear the next one. A theory that claimed our eyes emitted rays capable of touching objects. Yes, like biological lasers. Imagine if, instead of capturing light, our eyes were like flashlights emitting invisible rays to illuminate the world. Well, that was the basis of one of the strangest theories of antiquity, the so-called emission theory. Great philosophers like Plato and Euclid believed that vision worked because the eyes emitted beams of energy, a kind of ocular ray that touched objects, allowing us to see. It's almost like imagining everyone had superpowers worthy of Marvel superheroes. And, curiously, this idea seemed to make sense. After all, when you look at someone in the dark, you can't see anything. But when there's light, everything is revealed. For them, this happened because the eye's rays combined with external light. A simple, elegant, and completely wrong explanation. For centuries, this theory coexisted with other hypotheses until scientists like Alhazen, in the 11th century, began to seriously question emission. Through experiments with pinhole cameras and lenses, he showed that light actually enters the eyes, not the other way around. Even so, the idea of vision by rays lingered in the popular imagination. After all, who hasn't felt someone's gaze burning the back of their neck? That sensation seemed like proof that the eyes were emitting something. It's fascinating to think that such an unlikely idea persisted for millennia, influenced philosophy, and was only surpassed with advances in optics. But hold on, because we're reaching the final stretch. The next theory isn't just bizarre. It's a true reflection on how science evolves and how today's crazy ideas might become tomorrow's certainties. After all this, one question becomes inevitable. How many of our current scientific certainties won't be seen as bizarre in the future? Just like geocentrism, phlogiston, spontaneous generation, and so many other theories, maybe we're just writing another chapter in the long history of human knowledge. And that's precisely the beauty of science. It's not an unchangeable dogma, but a constant search for better answers. Yesterday's ideas may seem naive, even funny, but they pave the way for today's advances. Without the mistakes of the past, we wouldn't have the successes that brought us here. Think about it. Laughing at the cheese moon is easy now that we have astronauts who've walked there. But who's to say that 300 years from now, people won't laugh at some of our most advanced theories? Will they find it funny that we believed in the Big Bang, cosmic strings, or even the idea of multiverses? In the end, these stories remind us that science is built on boldness. For every crazy theory, there's a spark of curiosity that can turn the impossible into real discoveries. So which of these bizarre theories surprised you the most? Did you already know some of them, or were you caught off guard? Let me know in the comments, because I want to hear. Oh, and don't forget, if you enjoyed this journey through the strangest ideas in the history of science, give it a like, share it with that curious friend, and of course subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Because in the end, the next crazy theory might be closer than we think.